Week 1 of Seahawks training camp is officially in the books. Which players stood out as the biggest winners on offense and defense? I'll be breaking it all down on a bonus Saturday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks to all the 12s tuning in for this bonus episode, whether you're listening from Butte, Montana, or over in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We greatly appreciate you making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. In this case, 6 days a week. Seahawks getting wrapped up with their first week of training camp, the first 3 practices. They're off today. I'm going to be diving into the big winners out of the first 3 practices on offense and defense. And then I'm going to be tackling your mailbag questions. Got some really fun ones that I'm looking forward to answering on today's bonus episode. Without further ado, let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on this bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks. Seattle has wrapped up 3 training camp practices already. They've all been non-contact as mandated by the NFL. Teams have to ease players back in. Maybe the pads come out on Sunday. I anticipate it's going to be another practice or 2 before the shoulder pads come out and we see a bit more physicality leading towards actual regular season and preseason games that will be coming up. But nonetheless, still the chance to assess players, and there have been some standouts on both sides of the ball that I think have really helped their stock so far in training camp. And let's start on the offensive side of the football. And I'm just going to say this right now. There's going to be plenty of running back discussion on this show, but the first 3 practices or 4 practices, depending how long you're in the non-contact phase 1 before you get the pads on, I think that is one of the most difficult positions to assess and get excited about because they're not getting tackled. They're not even getting wrapped up. It's against the league rules. So, of course, every running back, when they get a handoff and guys are able to tackle them and they end up going 70 yards for a touchdown, of course, they're going to look fantastic. But there is an eye test metric that does stand out at every position, and I feel like you can see that at running back at times. Last year, Ken Walker III, the first couple of practices, it was apparent that he had a different level of juice compared to most running backs in the league. And Kenny McIntosh, the 7th rounder out of Georgia, he's my first big winner on the offensive side of the ball, just simply because there were questions about his athleticism after a subpar combine performance and pro day performance. That's what led to him falling to the 7th round. But if you watch Georgia's tape on their way to winning their 2nd straight national championship a year ago, you didn't see the athletic testing numbers when this kid is moving. And it's been the same way here the first 3 practices. And again, I can't truly assess where he fits in as far as being able to break through tackles and things of that nature, because quite frankly, that hasn't been going on yet at training camp and they haven't got preseason games going on. But in terms of burst, speed, quickness, all those things can be visually seen out there on the field right now. You can see the athletic traits, the ability to bounce runs quickly, decisively, cut back. He's been showing that so far. He's also showed off those soft hands that made him one of the top receiving running backs in college football last year for Georgia. So been pretty excited by what I've seen from him. I'm really eager to see where he ends up fitting in the 3rd down race once we get to more actual football when the pads come out. My second big winner, he's a guy we've been talking about a lot the last few weeks. Dee Eskridge kind of became a forgotten commodity with Jackson Smith and Jigba coming to town. And Smith and Jigba, I'll talk about him in a second. He's been impressive, but Dee Eskridge has scored multiple touchdowns in the first 3 days. You're seeing the 4.3 speed, the ability to get in and out of his breaks and separate from defenders after the catch. We just didn't get a chance to see that the last 2 years because he's been hurt nonstop, but he's been healthy, knock on wood. He's been healthy throughout the offseason program, now these first 3 days in training camp, and he's had catches from both Drew Lock and Geno Smith. He looks very comfortable. He's playing with a lot of confidence. So even with Jackson Smith and Jigba now coming to town as a 1st-round pick, it feels like Dee Eskridge, there's something different here with him in year 3. As long as you can keep him healthy, it's going to add another skill set to this offense. There are things that he can do that you're not going to get from Jackson Smith and Jigba out of the slot. Dee Eskridge, there are still a handful of plays that are specifically catered to him with his burst, his quickness, the powerful lower body to break tackles. So I've been very encouraged by what I'm seeing from him. And the other big winner, I just mentioned him, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Receivers are always going to stand out the first 3 days, but there's a reason that this hype train with number 11 is just picking up speed and continuing to accelerate. You are seeing the sharp route running. You are seeing the chemistry already developing with Geno Smith, the ability to make nice catches over the middle of the field. The other day, the one-handed grab, I know the safety probably would have blasted him, but still, that was an impressive catch, as impressive as you're going to see in a training camp practice. So you've seen the highlight reel grabs. You've seen the ability for him to work the intermediate middle part of the field and make nice catches. You can see the acceleration and the quickness. And quite frankly, he can win downfield. You're seeing that too. He might not be a 4.4, 4.3 guy like Dee Eskridge or DK Metcalf or Tyler Lockett, but he still has plenty of speed to be able to win downfield, and his route running ability creates some extra separation for him. So I've really been impressed with what I've seen from Jackson Smith and Jigba these first 3 days. Looks every bit the part of a first-round pick joining this offense so far. On the defensive side of the football, I'm going to start off with a former undrafted rookie, a guy that played in 3 games last year, no defensive snaps in regular season games, just a special teams player. But with Jordan Brooks being out right now, it creates an opportunity for one of these younger linebackers to really rise up and take advantage of extra reps. And right now, I think Vi Jones has improved his stock as much as any player on this football team for a few reasons. One, he just looks more like an off-ball linebacker in the NFL. Last year, I've made this joke a few times, but it almost looked like with him wearing KJ Wright's number that it was the skeleton of KJ Wright. He's a really thin, lean player to be playing that position. He's added 10 pounds of muscle, and it's evident out there in the field. He's still a lean linebacker, but he looks much stronger than he did a year ago. So I can't wait to see what he does once they get the pads on. The interception that he had in Friday's practice, the amount of range that he showed off, getting to the sideline and then keeping both feet in bounds. It was a impressive interception, as impressive of a pick as you're going to see at a training camp practice. His ability to fly all over the field, he has the athleticism advantage over some of the other players like John Radigan and Patrick O'Connell, the undrafted rookie out of Montana, that I think gives him a great chance to push for one of those final spots on the 53-man roster, especially if Jordan Brooks is not ready for week 1. This kid looks like he is ready to make a big leap, and I can't wait to see what he does in preseason games. Going to the middle of the defensive line, going from a guy that hasn't played defensive snaps in the regular season to a multi-year starter. And the reason I think Jarran Reed is one of the big winners, he has been very active. And I know that the defensive line and offensive line, they're not playing full throttle. They don't have pads on, but you can just see the energy that he's bringing to the practice field, how it's rubbing off on the rest of the defensive linemen. He's been very disruptive, sneak his way into the backfield, not able to tackle anybody, but he would have if it was an actual football game situation. And Pete Carroll has said they're wanting to put him at nose tackle. I think they're going to be using that position a little bit differently than they did last year. And so that's going to be fascinating to see how that unfolds. But I think Jarran Reed's had a really good start to his second tenure in Seattle. I'm really excited to see where he fits in terms of nose tackle once the pads come on. But he has had a fun start so far, and you can tell he's really excited to be back in the Pacific Northwest. And my last big winner on defense, this is a guy that we've talked about a lot, but I mean, Mike Jackson, everybody is saying that this is Devin Witherspoon's job, and I'm going to sit here and tell you that I'd be stunned if it's not Devin Witherspoon's job on the outside, but Mike Jackson is doing as much as he can to make that competition at the boundary position an intriguing one, a legitimate competition. He is playing as well as anybody in the field, had a bunch of pass breakups yesterday, talked about it, him and DK Metcalf, the back and forth affair between those two. That was get your popcorn ready type on-field entertainment. Seeing those two guys go at each other, and it got a little bit chippy, but not to the point where they were going to be fighting or anything. But you could just see the competitive juices for both these guys. And Mike Jackson won more battles than he lost yesterday against DK Metcalf, and that's always a tough matchup for any corner with his speed and size. And seeing him get his hands on the football several times, he had a fantastic offseason program too. So maybe this is going to bolster his trade value. Maybe another team comes in and has interest, or maybe the Seahawks look at this as a situation where, hey, Devin Witherspoon can play slot some. We can get Mike Jackson on the field. But either way, he has been incredibly impressive in the secondary. And at worst, it has shown off that incredible depth the Seahawks have there with a couple of guys that are backups that would probably start for a large chunk of teams in the NFL. That's the kind of depth the Seahawks have built at the cornerback position. Coming up next, I'm going to be answering your questions on a special Saturday mailbag. We'll get to those questions here in a moment on Locked On Seahawks. This bonus episode for all of us. Here we go. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. When I was a site manager, LinkedIn Jobs was my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates, and they made the process easy and seamless. All you have to do is create your job post and add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with the right skills and experience so you can easily prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. You're listening to the bonus Saturday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12 for joining me here on this weekend episode. It's training camp, and there's always so much to talk about. Just broke down the week 1 winners from the first 3 practices for the Seahawks on offense and defense. Now, going to get to your questions here in a special Saturday mailbag. Got some really fun ones, so let's get to those questions here. Our first one, and this is coming from Papa Seahawk, tweets, who do you think has shown the most improvement from last season so far? So it's just been 3 practices. And again, without seeing these guys playing actual football, I think that this is a tricky question to answer. But I just mentioned Vi Jones. I think he's improved as much as anybody with the added muscle. He just looks more comfortable at the off-ball linebacker position after another off-season program. Remember, when he came last year, they were playing him in kind of a hybrid role. He was playing edge a little bit during the preseason, as well as learning the off-ball linebacker spot. And so he was really a project, and he's made big progress. And I think Miles Adams, I put him on this every year, but it's just because he's one of those guys that every season he seems to find ways to step his game up. And now he's got a legitimate opportunity to play a lot of snaps. So those 2, and I think on offense, I could say Dee Eskridge, but I think the talent has always been there. His issue's been injuries. I'm going to mention a player that I had here on the podcast a few days ago. K. Johnson, I think, looks fantastic out there. And he's going to have a difficult time making this football team with all the talent they have at the receiving position. But you have to remember what he did with Geno Smith in Week 18 last year, and then getting 3 catches in the wild card loss to San Francisco. Very productive college receiver, had a great Senior Bowl week coming out of South Dakota State. There's a lot to like about this kid, and he's got good chemistry with Geno Smith. So K. Johnson looks like he has taken, from those 2 games, he has taken another big step forward in a really talented receiving core. And right now, I would have him on the right side of the bubble. I think he has improved a lot. You can see just the confidence he's playing with. He's always been a good route runner, but he's just taken it to another level so far in training camp. He's got a couple touchdowns so far, showing the ability to win downfield. He can win in the short to intermediate game as well. And I think he's going to factor in on special teams this time around. Hopefully not going to be muffing punts, because that's how you get in Pete Carroll's doghouse. But if he can avoid that, he was a really good special teams player at South Dakota State as well. So I think Kate Johnson is a player to keep a very close eye on. Our next question from Epic Ninja Bros tweets, what positions do the Seahawks need to be careful with injury? In recent years, is there a position the Hawks seem to be very injury prone in? Well, the easy answer to this one is running back. We remember what happened when Marshawn Lynch had to come out of retirement back in 2019, when they had Chris Carson, CJ Prosise, and Travis Homer all go down very quickly. And Rashad Penny went down. Injuries have been a significant hurdle for the Seahawks at the running back position. It feels like for the last 5 or 6 years that they've just had major problems keeping guys healthy. Penny had all his injuries. Carson got banged up several times. Prosise couldn't stay healthy. Even last year, Ken Walker III missed a game. So it is a position that's incredibly fragile with how much of a beating that those guys take. But I'm also going to put safety on here just because of the track record recently. I mean, Jamal Adams has missed a ton of games. Quandre Diggs was able to play in every game last year, but he had a significant injury at the very end of the season before. He's now 30. Ryan Neal, when he left for Tampa Bay, there were some injuries last year for him. So that seems to be a position where they've had some issues. Bradley McDougall missed some games when he was a starter. They've had some issues with that spot keeping guys healthy. Even Earl Thomas, the multiple broken legs before leaving Seattle. Like, that is a position that is consistently giving them some issues in terms of durability. So those would be two that I would watch. This is a high injury rate game, though, regardless. So you're going to have to expect there's going to be some injuries across the board. But those are the two positions they've really had issues keeping guys healthy. Champion 89 1971 tweets, 5 years from now, who will have the most Pro Bowl appearances in your opinion? Devin Witherspoon or Jalen Carter? That's a heck of a question, and I think it's really difficult to answer because I think if Jalen Carter obviously is able to keep himself out of trouble, I think that Jalen Carter has a chance to be a special defensive tackle. I've never denied the talent that this kid has. He is a fantastic football player that has the upside to be a perennial All-Pro. But there are enough red flags there. You don't necessarily know what you're going to get. I could see him being an outstanding perennial All-Pro, Pro Bowl type player. I could also see this being a situation where if things don't go exactly right, work ethic comes into play. Who knows if he's even starting for that team with Jordan Davis being there and some of the other players they have in the interior defensive line. So I think this is tricky. Devin Witherspoon's in a really good secondary, but he's got a great coaching staff, a phenomenal player. I think it's more likely that both these guys are going to be very similar in their trajectory in terms of recognition for all pros and Pro Bowls. I think Devin Witherspoon has that kind of talent too. So maybe it's cheating, but I think these two are going to be in a very similar situation. If I had to make a bet right now, I would probably lean towards Jalen Carter getting more all pros just because of the position group that he plays. And there's a lot of really good corners in the NFL right now. But I think both these guys are going to have successful careers as long as they're able to keep their life in check off the field, particularly Jalen Carter. The Seahawks, I don't think, have anything to worry about with Witherspoon in that regard, which is why they made that selection as they did. Next question coming from today's Seahawks tweets. Could Mike Jackson and Devin Witherspoon split at left cornerback? I would prefer Jackson starting there and Witherspoon at nickel and move Bryant back outside. Is it possible that Seattle could consider doing that? That's not even including Tariq Woolen in the equation, though. He is going to be back here in the near future. Woolen's going to be on the field. He'll be off the PUP list soon. So you're going to have Woolen at one of those spots. And so what it really boils down to is, what do you want to do with Devin Witherspoon? I could see them changing from past tendencies and doing a move corner type situation where Devin Witherspoon is going with whoever the best receiver is. That is something the Seahawks have not done under Pete Carroll. But they haven't had a corner like Devin Witherspoon that can be that good in the nickel as well as on the outside. I would hedge bets, though, they're going to stick with tradition, and I think Witherspoon is still going to end up being the guy on the outside, and Kobe Bryant and Julian Love being the ones that play in the nickel spot. Maybe Devin Witherspoon can slide down in there sometimes, and they have Mike Jackson come in. But Pete Carroll's never been somebody that strikes me as somebody that wants to platoon players at corner. He did it a few years ago, but that was not when they had the talent that they have at this position group right now and the investments that they have made at that position group. So I'd be surprised if they go a platoon route there with those two guys once the regular season gets here. Our next question here, and this one is coming from J Combs 4518. Oh, this is a loaded question coming off YouTube. What do you think is going on with the running back devaluation? Have teams just figured out the position doesn't matter much, or is there more to it? So I think this is one, I try to keep my answers fairly short on these so we can get to as many questions as possible, but this has been a difficult subject for me, and I've talked about this on the podcast a lot. I played running back. I coached running backs for a number of years at the varsity level in high school in Indianapolis, as well as just outside of Seattle at Mount Si High School. So I have been working with running backs for a long time. I played the position for a long time. And so it's been difficult to watch how this has gone the last 6, 7, 8 years, where now teams are basically saying, we are going to draft a running back. We'll give them 4 or 5 years at the most, and then we move on and we'll just go draft somebody else. And I don't necessarily think that that is the right way to go about things all the time. I do think that some teams, that's probably the right move for them to make if they don't have an elite player at the running back position. But I guess what really bothers me is I've been following football for a long time, and I know the game is much different now than it was in the 90s, but there were a number of great backs in the 90s and maybe double digits running backs in the 90s that were really good for 7 or 8 years minimum. And now you're telling me with how finely tuned these athletes are in the NFL that, 4 years, 5 years, they're done. That just doesn't compute for me. And one of my theories, and I can expand on this on a later episode, but the game has changed so much in the sense of what teams are allowed to do before the season. And I remember playing the running back position. That did training camp stink? Did doing two-a-days stink? Absolutely. They were miserable. But as a running back, there's two different kinds of shape. There's your running, conditioning, lifting shape, which most of these guys are in phenomenal shape from that regard. And then there's football shape. And I think running backs and linemen in particular are the ones that are impacted by the reduction in physicality before games that has happened because of the safety that the league is trying to push. And I get it. I understand the concussion concerns and all that stuff. I get it. I understand why they've made these changes. But I do wonder, and some listeners might think this is counterproductive, but I'm just telling you this from my experience, the running backs that I've talked to. I don't know that I've ever talked to a running back that disagrees with me on this. There's something to be said for taking a beating during training camp and getting your body in shape to play that position. When you are running the ball 20 to 25 times in a game, or at least that's the way it used to be, your players like Emmitt Smith and Barry Sanders and those guys, like, they were getting hit during training camp. Now you go to a training camp practice, and even when they have the pads on, it's at worst thump, where they just wrap guys up hard, and then that's it. They don't get them to the ground. These guys are not getting their bodies prepared for the physicality they're going to be dealing with on Sundays. They're not getting prepared for that. And I know that they're staying fresh. That's the other argument. Well, these guys should be better off because they're not taking all that beating. But I think there is something to be said for that physicality before games being taken out of the equation. And I think that that has contributed to some of these backs declining a little bit earlier. And I know that it doesn't always add up thinking about that, but how, it's like pitch counts in baseball. How could Nolan Ryan and a bunch of pitchers like that be able to throw as much as they did, not have the arm problems? Then here we are, these guys have these major arm issues now, saying baseball. I know guys are throwing harder. There are other factors to consider there. That's not necessarily a perfect one-on-one comparison, but I just feel like that has really impacted running backs. I think some of these guys would be better off if there was more contact to prepare these guys. They're not playing in the regular or preseason either. These guys they're going in dry. And I know they're phenomenal athletes and some of them can go in and do that, but I just feel like the way that the rules have changed with practices and stuff, that has had a negative impact on a number of positions. And I would make the argument running back as much as anybody because of what their job requirements are. These guys have to prepare their bodies for the punishment that they're taking. And I think that this is something that has negative repercussions for that. So there are other things that I could argue about the devaluation of the running back position. I don't agree with it, especially with what's going on in Indianapolis right now. I fear that the Indianapolis Colts are going to be regretting having to get rid of Jonathan Taylor if it comes to that. It looks like that's the only option, is to move him now with how upset he is. And he has every right to be mad with the way that the team has handled this entire situation with one of their best players. But Anthony Richardson, not having him to turn around and hand the ball off to as he's trying to develop, that would be a big problem for the Indianapolis Colts. That's just my 10 cents. I think that this is something, maybe it's cyclical, but we'll just have to wait and see. It might be something that the league is going to continue to keep driving down the cost for paying running backs. And who knows what that means for the future of the position and which type of players are going to be wanting to play that spot. Last question here real fast. This one coming from Tyler Sporting tweets, who's your all-time Seahawks slot receiver? So I'm assuming this is the best slot receiver for the Seahawks. And I got a couple honorable mentions I want to throw out there. Bobby Engram, playing with Matt Hasselbeck, was one of the most underrated slot receivers during Seattle's heyday in the mid-2000s. He put up some big numbers, had 1 year with 1,000 receiving yards. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but he was the slot receiver primarily, put up some solid numbers in the touchdown category, always came up with the big clutch first down catches. He was that security blanket for Matt Hasselbeck. He doesn't have enough numbers to be number one on this list for me. I think Golden Tate, his last couple years in Seattle, did a really nice job. This really comes down to two players that have played for Seattle recently, though, in my opinion. It comes down to Tyler Lockett versus Doug Baldwin. And ultimately, I'm going to go with Doug Baldwin on this one. If I had to pick the better receiver of the two, I would pick Tyler Lockett because of his ability to win downfield as well. And he's played plenty of snaps at the boundary. But I think in terms of pure slot receiver, Doug Baldwin's route running and what he did off the line of scrimmage, his ability to juke out defenders and get himself open was unmatched, in my opinion, at least during his time in the league. Doug Baldwin was a master at being able to work the line of scrimmage and get away from defenders and create easy openings for Russell Wilson to throw the football. And he put up big numbers, had a couple 1,000-yard seasons, had a year with 15 touchdown receptions. To me, with most of his damage coming from the slot, not being a guy that played a ton outside in the boundary and didn't win a lot downfield necessarily as a vertical threat, Tyler Lockett, he was a different style receiver, but Doug Baldwin to me is the best slot receiver that the Seahawks have had in their entire franchise history. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. And coming up on Monday, we will be breaking down Sunday's action, the third open training camp practice of the VMAC, the highlights on offense, defense, all the sights and sounds. Rob Rang and I will be breaking it down. Make sure that you're listening in. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and go Hawks.